This lesson is call web APIs from the client side and set up CORS. The objectives for this particular lesson are to create an MVC website, call our web APIs that we created via JavaScript, and learn about CORS and why it is needed. Let's get started with creating an MVC website. Bring up another instance of Visual Studio, click on Create a New Project, and let's do a search now for the ASP.NET Core web app, but I want you to choose the one that says Model View Controller. We're going to use the MVC approach here. We're going to click Next. We'll give it a name, AdventureWorks. I'll put it into the location where I'm putting all of my projects. You put it into yours. And again, I like checking Place Solution and Project in the same directory. I'm going to click Next. Make sure you choose .NET 6, 7, or 8, whatever is appropriate. The authentication type will be none. I'm going to uncheck Configure for HTTPS, and I'm going to leave the rest of the things alone here. And I'm going to go ahead and now create this new MVC application. This is going to be a website now, because we want to actually have the website make calls to our web API project. Once the application is created, it does have some default things built in, so you can go ahead and run it just to ensure that everything works. And you see that it comes up with a nice little welcome page here in our browser. So we have a working website from which we can now make calls to our web API project. So let's take that home page and we'll add some code in there to actually make a JavaScript call from that page over to our web API project. Let's now go ahead and open up Views, Home, Index.cshtml, and let's replace all of the code in here with this code. So what I'm doing in here, I've got a title, get a product via minimal web API call. I have a button that says get a product. The onClick says to call a function called getProduct, and if we look down here, we see a script, and we see that I've got a URL to my web API. Now you'll want to make sure that you replace that port number right there, okay, with your port number from your project, your web API project. The other thing, notice up on line 19, I have a text area with an ID of product, and that's where I want to grab the data from the web API that's being returned and place it into that text area. Now this code should look very familiar to anybody that's done any sort of web API calls. In the function getProduct, I'm going to use the fetch API, passing in that URL in the .then. So the then function, I'm going to get the response. I'm going to convert that response.json. So it converts it to JSON data. That passes it on to the next then, and it comes in as data. I then take that data, stringify it, and I give it to that text area. I also put it out on the console window in my browser. Let's go ahead, let's go over to my AdventureWorks API project. I got to get that one running so that I can make a call. So that's the first step. Then we'll come back over to our AdventureWorks MVC project and we'll make this call by running the project here. So here's our new page. I'm going to click on Get a Product, and I get an error. And it says to check the console window. So I'm going to use my F12 browser tools to bring up the console. And I'm going to look at this here, and you can see I've been blocked by a CORS policy. Okay, so we're going to learn about CORS now and how we fix this up so that I can make this web API call. So what is CORS? CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing, and it's needed to allow calls from other domains to come in to your web API project. You got to think about this. We're running on two different servers. The servers need to trust each other. That's what the cross-origin resource sharing is all about. And we can configure CORS to accept all requests from any server. We can restrict it to certain servers or domains. We could even restrict to certain verbs and even certain headers being passed along in the request to our web API project. CORS is very powerful, and we need this so that we just don't have just anybody making calls to our web server. Now, we must add support for CORS in our program.cs, in our web API project. We do that by calling builder.services.add.CORS and adding some options. Now, the options are optional, but you're probably going to want to put those in. And the options, they configure what you're going to allow, right? All resources, all domains, only certain domains, all of that is what we pass in these options. So let's take a look at adding CORS to our web API project. So first off, let's stop this from running. That's our web API project. Let's open program.cs. Now, what we can do is just somewhere down here, we want to add a little bit of code now. And the code is builder.services.add.CORS, and then we pass in an options. And the options, we can add a policy with a builder. And the builder can say, allow any origin, which means, hey, just let anybody come in, or you can restrict it to only certain origins. We can also add some additional things like allow any method or with methods get, post, and put, but maybe not a delete. There's all sorts of configuration options we can do here. Now, we have to know what our local host is that's running our web application. So I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to grab that. It's a 5070 port. So I want to allow that one in here. I'll go ahead and change all of these are just commented out. Now that I've got that, that does the configuration. But what I have to do is one more step down here, and that's way down here after we've built the application, is I want to do it right before I create the scope again and enable this CORS middleware. So you can see I say app.useCORS and I use this AdventureWorks API CORS policy. This value here matches the same one that you see up here. All right, now let's go ahead, restart our web application project. Once that restarts, like so, let's come back over here and let's now try this call again. So we'll click on Get a Project and look at that. We now have the data coming in. So it's coming in perfectly because we allowed this domain to talk to our web API project. In this lesson, we created an MVC website. We called a web API from JavaScript, and we learned that we had to configure CORS to allow the access to come from our website into our web API project. Coming up next, organizing the program.cs file for readability.